Again, thank you for joining us in this webinar to launch a compendium that we published at the Carnegie Middle East Center on the experience of Arab diaspora businesses in Egypt. So diaspora businesses in Egypt navigate the same systemic hurdles as their Egyptian counterparts. They face an intricate bureaucracy and they have to rely on personal connections to get things done. However, diaspora businesses face an additional layer of precarity tied to acquiring permits, residence permits, and visas. And smaller ventures are particularly disadvantaged in contrast to larger, well-connected firms that are better able to secure stable work conditions and growth opportunities. So what does the business landscape look like for Arab diaspora businesses in Egypt? What types of capital do these entrepreneurs draw on to start their businesses? And how do these forms of capital shape their strategies for success in the Egyptian environment? And what lessons do their experiences offer for the broader business environment? To explore these questions and more, we're very happy to have with us today 5 speakers who examined the case of Syrian, Sudanese, Yemeni, and Libyan diaspora businesses in Egypt in a compendium that I had the pleasure of co-editing with my colleague Yazid Sayegh. So I'm very pleased to be hosting this virtual panel discussion in collaboration with the Center for Legal, Economic, and Social Studies, Sadegh Khartoum and Sadegh Cairo, to mark the publication of this compendium. So let me first welcome and introduce our 5 speakers before we start our discussion. This is going to be a 1-hour webinar, and it will just be at the beginning a discussion between me and the speakers to present the research, and we will then have the last 10 minutes, hopefully, for questions from the audience. So we have with us today Qabool Al-Absi, a human rights defender specializing in women's issues, refugee rights, and community peace building, and Dua Abu Swar, an affiliated researcher at the Center for Economic, Legal, and Social Studies, Khartoum, Sadegh Khartoum. We also have Marie Bassi, the coordinator of Sadegh Khartoum, and Maya Shhade, an affiliated researcher at the Center for International Studies at Sciences Po Paris and at Sadegh Cairo, and Soraya Rahem, an affiliated researcher at Sadegh Cairo. And my name is Noor Arafeh, and I'm a fellow at the Carnegie Middle East Center. So I'm going to start with Maya, who wrote an essay focusing on the case study of Syrian businesses in Egypt. And Maya, in the essay you wrote, you documented significant growth for Syrian businesses in Egypt. The number of Syrian owners in Egypt, Syrian business owners, increased from 15,000 in 2016 to 30,000 by 2023. With investments reaching up to $1 billion. But you emphasize in the essay that social capital has been just as important as financial resources for this success. So can you walk us through how social capital functions for Syrian businesses in Egypt? Complex political economy, and what patterns do you see when you look at how different Syrian businesses have fared over time?
Yes, many thanks, Noor, and many thanks to Carnegie Middle East and for this opportunity, and to the other co-authors, to Yazid and to yourself for this opportunity to present some of my research. It was a very interesting question because social capital, as I have seen in my research and previous work and discussions with scholars, is notably undermined. I consider so. It's really important for me to emphasize on this question of how it functions, especially in in a complex political economy such as in Egypt. So first, maybe let's start by defining what social capital is. It has been defined widely in French sociology literature in different ways, but I will use one definition that I noted in my essay, which is from Bandari and Yasunubo, and which basically is uh, the social networks, behaviors, and norms that are held by individuals. So it can be very broad, and it is very broad for a reason, because it's actually what I found was the most interesting of the capital, that of the different capitals, and maybe we can just put a note here on what the others are. We can have economic capital, economic or financial capital. We can have cultural capital, or we can even have symbolic capital. So, and here social capital has been analyzed by my research, and has appeared as one of the most important capitals, because it enabled Syrians to actually grow it and to accumulate it while mobilizing it. So by utilizing the norms, behaviors, and networks that they already had when they arrived to Egypt, they were actually able to create new businesses and grow them. And I make this argument because what has been not out of the blue, because other research has already showed the importance of social capital, such as, for example, Amr Adli's very interesting work and important work on that showed the nature and the characteristic of Egypt's political economy, that is heavily tied on social networks and on social capital, notably through trust relationships, and a low degree of differentiation between social and economic ties. And because of this nature, Syrian business owners were able to develop themselves, were able to develop their ventures, and they were able to navigate them. And they learned how to do business by testing and sometimes failing and testing again. And it's this kind of semi-formal economy that is also noted by Adli in his work, that enabled them to actually grow their network and to actually adopt new beliefs and new norms and new ways of actually utilizing their network to do business. It helped them also notably learn how to approach the Egyptian political economy itself. So they learned how to understand what sectors they could integrate in and what sectors they couldn't, because one should actually note and mention that not all sectors were equally accessible to Syrian businesses, although there is this positive reputation on Syrian businesses in Egypt. As I mentioned in my essay, there have been business owners or that tried to launch businesses in the pharmaceutical sector, for example, and they failed to do so. And it's actually by this ability to test and fail and retest that social capital was able to create business opportunities for Syrians, and sometimes not. So they were able to pivot to other ideas through the networks that they made. So as Egyptian, as Egyptians, and like Egyptian small, medium business sized businesses, Syrians were also able to utilize their social networks to lower transaction costs. And this is and this was done by obtaining market information, for example, from lawyers, from officials, or people that were simply close to the power. And this is where it facilitated their conduct of business and raised their competitiveness. It wasn't actually true in everywhere, because, and this is maybe something that I will touch upon when I look at what I have observed in terms of patterns on how different Syrian businesses have fared over time, as location was very key to how Syrian business owners were able to develop or not. But they were able to raise their competitiveness, notably in a context of legal ambiguity, and which is a term that was used by Kelsey Norman, and where she actually puts the importance on how changing regulations has created a context of legal vagueness around what is possible and what not. Until 2013, Syrians benefited from an open migration policy that changed completely after the change of the regime in July 2013. There are also a change of regulation in 2018 with regards to authorizations that were installed in certain sectors requiring security clearance, for example, in order to work in the ICT sector, or more recently, the asylum law that was passed and that was published in December 2024. So these this legal ambiguity or these regulations that became more and more strict actually created an environment where the knowledge or the access to information in terms of what is possible in the formal sector and what is less possible in a, let's say, semi-formal sector, because I won't say it's an informal sector completely, was actually very important, and it is through the networks and through the ways of functioning through behaviors, norms, and values that Syrians were able to navigate it. And this actually happened through an inherited social capital sometime from Syria. So what I observed was that lots of Syrian business owners used similar practices, social practices than in Syria, such as using tawsiya, trust and recommendations from other persons, or intermediation, wasta, which are forms of clientelism that actually help them navigate and understand better how to create become more competitive in an environment that is competitive and that is embedded into a certain political economy structure. Syrians also quickly understood how their social capital can be mobilized through networks within their own communities. That was actually observed notably within the micro and small businesses, which was very interesting in comparison to the medium and larger businesses. Those that mobilized and utilized the networks within their families, their neighbors, and their networks that they inherited from Syria actually allowed them to create and grow a business, but that was actually contained, that wasn't able to actually grow bigger than those that were able to expand to others and to other non-Syrian communities. And on that point, I think what is very interesting to look at when looking at social capital analysis of how notably Syrians were able to utilize this is they created even a certain way that was described in lots of instances as the Syrian way. It's an inherited social capital that is also tied to a cultural capital of a way of doing business, of using certain values and norms. Notably, when I think about this example of this home-based business owner that was able to expand into a multi-branch supermarket in Egypt through the use of this sales technique that was remarkable, that became remarkable amongst certain businesses, notably in the food industry. And this was also possible as well through the utilization of networks and partnership with Syrians from prior migration waves, for example, from the 80s, showcasing the importance of how other social networks mobilization that were not necessarily 100% coming from the migration wave in 2011, but that was from before, actually was utilized in a way to grow businesses. And even even though networks were not always part of the community of origin when doing businesses, and hereby concretely what I mean is when Syrians were able to partner with each other but didn't come from the same circumstances of exile after 2011 and before 2011, they were able to create opportunities with each other, adapting the way of doing business and learning from each other and twisting the way of doing business. Noor, do you want me to directly dive into the second question? I think we have you could just let me know because I already touched on certain parts.
Exactly. I think given the time, Maya, maybe if we have time in the Q&A, you can specifically address the second question. But this was thank you so much. This was very important. So basically, for Syrian businesses, both financial capital and social capital are very important for economic survival and growth. Entrepreneurship is not enough. You need the social ties. And I also found it very interesting what you said, how the differences in social capital could explain the variation we're seeing between big Syrian businesses and smaller ones, in the sense that big businesses, they have access not only to Syrian networks, but also Egyptian networks, while smaller ones are more confined to the Syrian community. So thank you so much, Maya. I'd like us now to turn to the experience of Sudanese businesses, which was addressed by Marie and Dua. So building on what we just heard about the importance of social networks, your essay, Marie and Dua, on specifically on this on the Sudanese businesses that were displaced after the 2023 war, reveals two very different trajectories. So, what distinguishes these two very different paths? If you can also shed light on what these two different trajectories are, and what factors determine which trajectory a Sudanese business ends up on?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for you, Noor, and also for Yazid and for Karinji for this opportunity to present our research on the Sudanese entrepreneurs in Cairo following the 2023 war. And so to respond on the question of which is raised by Noor about the diversity of business trajectories, we will begin with a few words about our research process generally, and we will then examine how the key factors that help explain why Sudanese businesses follow such different paths. So since the outbreak of the war in Sudan, which was in April 2023, approximately 1.5 million Sudanese have fled to Egypt, mainly to Cairo, and this new waves of displacement adds to the roughly 4 million Sudanese who were already residing in the country. And then illustrating the long-standing historical ties between the two countries, Sudan and Egypt. So, while many recent arrivals have launched businesses in Egypt, their trajectories have diverged sharply. Some businesses have managed to rebuild or even expand their businesses, while others were struggling to survive in the informal economy. These differences are also not random. They are reflect pre-existing structural inequalities, specifically in terms of financial capital and also access to the international networks. So at the same period, Egyptian migration and also economic regulation, such as tightening the visa regulation, strict residency requirements, and also barriers to business registration, have impacted the landscape of entrepreneurship for all the Sudanese, but also basically for those who are newly displaced. So, a few words first about the research process that brought us up to this point. Like many researchers focusing on Sudan and also Sudanese displacement in Cairo post-2023, Marie and I began our fieldwork in Faisal, a very densely populated neighborhood in Cairo, Giza, governorate, that has emerged as a central hub for Sudanese fleeing the war 2023, to the point that it has become emblematic of this recent wave of displacement. So there we observe that a dense construction of the micro and also small Sudanese businesses, family-run, and then grocery shops, dukans, beauty salons, cafe, serving basically Sudanese clientele. And these enterprises operated informally, also without any kind of legal registration, and are typically run by Sudanese with a precarious legal status, including even those who have the UNHCR cards, which they are under their protection, or those who on the short-term visa, tourist visa. who entered Egypt in the early weeks of the war when the entry was still easier to cross the border legally. So they rely heavily on the informal networks for money exchange and also supply chains. And these businesses generally yield low profit margins. Beyond financial consideration, they are also a space of community, memory, and identity, and practicing of homemaking that allow people to smell Sudan. And running such a business also give a degree of social capital and recognition with this Sudanese community. However, as our fieldwork explained, we come across Sudanese businesses that look entirely different. Medium and large firms were operated in more affluent areas such as Nasr City, Duggi, and Mohandisin, and these firms work in a sector like external trades, especially agri-food and the crops, import and export the crops, logistics, consultancy, and also even the music production. So this strike contracts lead us actually to ask this question: why do some Sudanese entrepreneurs remain confined to low-profit activities in the informal sectors while others pursue paths of strategic investment and growth? So to answer these questions, the answer lies in the pre-extending forms of capital economics and also social, and how this intersect with the evolving institutional and political context in Cairo. And in simple terms, some Sudanese businessmen arrive in Egypt prepared, while others arrive almost with nothing. So larger businesses often had a long-standing ties with Egypt, and they already had Egyptian bank accounts, and in some cases owned real estate, and many were embedded in transnational networks with access to offshore accounts, especially in the UAE. So this allowed them to transfer and also replicate their businesses with a minimum disruption. As one businessman told us, and I quote here, shipping costs increased after the war, but it doesn't stop my business. I already had contact, the capital, and also trusted brand. So I just continue. Okay. In contrast, micro and also small businesses were built out of necessity, and this embedded in the limited capital and also international networks. I will let Mary to lead the second part.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dua. Thank you, Noor, and thank you all the Carnegie team. So now I will try to highlight the main factors that shape the trajectory of Sudanese businesses in Egypt that already Dua explained a bit. One of the first factors was the financial capital and the access to banking. Indeed, larger businesses arrived with significant capital and often in foreign currency, and they held accounts in Egypt or abroad. It was said a few minutes ago. So this gave them a crucial advantage in navigating Egypt's banking and investment landscape. And it also protected them from the volatility of Sudanese pound and the collapse of Sudan's banking system after the war. And also before the war, offshore accounts were also very crucial in mitigating the effects of international sanctions that had been imposed on Sudan since the 90s and early 2000s. And by contrast, most small-scale entrepreneurs were and are still unable to open an Egyptian bank account and arrived with less capital. Indeed, Sudanese recognized as refugees by the UNHCR are excluded from the banking system altogether. And even those who could obtain tourist visa, short-term visa, often face difficulty in opening bank accounts. And moreover, in a context where Sudanese are subject to important surveillance, remaining outside the formal system makes them also less traceable. And we knew that strict controls and restriction on money transferred into bank accounts have also discouraged many of them from even trying to use a formal banking system, which is also very costly. So as a result, these entrepreneurs rely on informal brokers for money transfer and currency exchange, And those arrangements are both risky and limit the amount of money that can be circulated. A second important factor is the access to international mobility or freedom of movement, which is a key divide between the two categories we identified. Indeed, many larger businesses were able to obtain long-term investment visa that allow them for multiple entries into Egypt and easier access to administrative procedures. Although the issuance of such visas has recently been restricted, they remain a crucial tool for business mobility. Smaller entrepreneurs, however, are effectively trapped in Egypt. For those who hold short-term visas, as well as for refugees, leaving the country often means losing the ability to return to Egypt, as re-entry for Sudanese now requires very high fees, around $3,000. So this immobility directly impacts business strategy because it confines smaller businesses owners to local markets and limits a lot access to new suppliers or regional partnership. A third factor is the networks and the partnership, especially with Egyptian. Indeed, larger Sudanese firms are embedded in a broader business network, both Sudanese and Egyptian, and many have formed partnership with Egyptian companies in fields like food distribution, logistics, and entertainment. And these partnerships provide both economic opportunities and a degree of legal protection, for instance, through shared ownership or using an Egyptian partner for official business registration. Smaller businesses, in contrast, operate primarily within closed ethnic networks. They rely on family and friends for labor, for funding, for logistics, which does not allow them to grow or to formalize. And the last factor, of course, as Dua said, it intersects with the regulatory environment. While the Egyptian government has expressed an interest in attracting Sudanese investment, in practice, its policies tend to favor large, well-capitalized businesses. And also the constantly shifting and quite opaque regulatory environment, marked by changes in visa policy, business registration procedures, affected more smaller entrepreneurs who lack the legal knowledge and or financial resources to adapt. And moreover, small businesses owners have also to deal with rising costs due to the high level of inflation in Egypt. So to conclude, we can say that the divergent path of Sudanese entrepreneurs in Egypt are shaped not only by individual agency, as Maya said also, but by structural factors, namely the access to financial capital existing to the war, the prior familiarity with the Egyptian society, economy, and markets, and the connections to the Egyptian business community, but also the access to international mobility and transnational networks. As one of our interlocutors in Faisal told us, here we are building businesses, but we are always ready to leave. Egypt is not a home, it's a waiting room. In contrast, for larger Sudanese firms, Egypt has become a platform for continuity, investment, and even expansion. So these two trajectories are not merely economic, they reflect deep inequalities in access to mobility, capital, and legitimacy. And just a last thing, everything we have written is based on the fieldwork carried out between spring 2024 and spring 2025. And as you know, things are changing rapidly, especially in the Sudanese context. And this would require long-term research. Thanks a lot for your attention and thanks for the question.
Thank you so much, Dua and Marie, for presenting us the experience of Sudanese businesses who moved to Egypt after the 2023 war. So basically, from what you said, I think there are two main stories we have. So it's a story for the large and medium-sized Sudanese businesses. It's a story of continuity. These businesses have substantial financial capital, as you said, offshore bank accounts, transnational business networks, and long-term resident residency permits. So they were able to show remarkable adaptability when they moved to Egypt. They were able to grow their businesses and diversify. So it's a story of continuity. While for the smaller and micro enterprises, it's a story basically of survival, because given the limited financial and social capital that they have and the short-term visas. And this is we see these divergent paths, or this diaspora business landscape between the big businesses and the smaller ones in the Yemeni case as well, which we will now turn to. So the Yemeni case will be presented by Qabool, who will speak in Arabic. So I will first ask the question in English, then ask it in Arabic. Qabool will present in Arabic, and then we will have a translator who will summarize Qabool's presentation to our English-speaking audience. So thank you for your patience. So Qabool, we've now heard about divergent outcomes in both Syrian and the Sudanese business communities. And in your research on the Yemeni entrepreneurs, you reveal what you call a bifurcated community, essentially two separate business ecosystems. My question is, how does this Yemeni bifurcation manifest differently from the patterns we've discussed in the Syrian and in the Sudanese case? And what unique role does social capital play in determining whether Yemeni businesses access Egypt's advantages or simply survive? So I'm going to ask the question now in Arabic. Again, thank you for your patience. قبول، شكرا لوجودك معنا اليوم. لقد سمعنا الآن عن النتائج المتباينة في كل من المجتمعات التجارية السورية والسودانية، وبحثك يتمحور حول رجال الأعمال اليمنيين ويكشف ما تصفينه بالمجتمع المنقسم. قبول، كيف يتجلى هذا الانقسام لرجال الأعمال اليمنيين؟ وما هو الدور الفريد الذي يلعبه رأس المال الاجتماعي في تحديد إذا كانت الشركات اليمنية ستحصل على مزايا وتكبر، أم أنها ستكتفي بالبقاء؟
أولاً شكراً جزيلاً لهذا الويبينار، وسعيدة أن أنا مشاركت في هذا البحث معكم أستاذة نورة والدكتور يزيد والمجموعة الموجودة معنا، وشكراً لهذا الحضور. سعيدة أننا اليوم أيضاً نتحدث عن رجال الأعمال اليمنيين في مصر وواقع رجال الأعمال اليمنيين في مصر، بالأخص مجتمع رجال الأعمال اليمنيين ودورهم الاقتصادي. تجربة اليمنيين في مصر هي تجربة مزجت بين قصص نجاح وقصص فيها تحديات للكثير من اليمنيين. انقسام المجتمع بين من تمكن من الاندماج والاستفادة من الفرص والبقاء، وبين من بقى على الهامش يسعى إنه فقط يستطيع العيش في ظل اضطرار إنه كثير من اليمنيين اضطروا إلى اللجوء إلى مصر أو الهجرة من اليمن بعد الحرب نتيجة استمرار الوضع وصعوبة الاستقرار. مش عارفة إذا هي حتترجم الآن ولا في النهاية يا نور؟
في النهاية الترجمة قبول.
ولا أوكي. ففي هذه الدراسة أنا تحدثت فيها حول المجتمع اليمني أو رجال الأعمال اليمني أنه منقسم ليس بالمعنى السياسي فقط الانقسام، بل أيضا هذا الانقسام يصل إلى انقسام اقتصادي، يصل إلى انقسام قانوني واجتماعي. فإذا تحدثنا من الناحية الاقتصادية نجد أن مجتمع رجال الأعمال الذين هم من الفئة المستقرة أو ذات دخل كبير أو جاءوا برأس مال استطاعوا بفضل هذا المال والعلاقات والخبرات السابقة إنه من تمكينهم من تأسيس شركات، من الدخول إلى أنشطة متوسعة في مصر سواء في الاستيراد، في التصدير، في إنشاء شركات كبيرة. استطاعوا الاستفادة من الحوافز، من الإعفاءات الضريبية، من المميزات التي تقدمها مصر للمستثمرين اليمنيين نتيجة المبالغ الكبيرة أو رأس المال الكبير الذي يحصلون عليه. في المقابل لدينا الفئة الأخرى اللي هي فئة أفراد الجالية اليمنية، وهي الفئة الأكثر خصوصا من بعد 2015 بعد الحرب، هي الفئة الأكثر التي أتت إلى مصر وهي ذات الدخل المحدود، منهم الكثير من اللاجئين. هؤلاء اتجهوا إلى مشاريع أو إنشاء مشاريع صغيرة إلى مشاريع متناهية الصغر. البعض منهم استطاع إنه يشتغل حول أو يفتح مطاعم، مشاريع صغيرة، مقاهي، محلات ملابس، مكتبة، أشياء زي كذا، بينما البعض منهم لجأ إلى خدمات بسيطة. وفي فئة عندنا اللي هي الأسر المنتجة التي اضطرت أن تعمل إلى إنتاج أشغال يدوية وتبيعها من المنزل، لأنها هذه الفئات لا تحتاج الكثير من المال لكنها تواجه الكثير من التحديات نتيجة ضعف التمويل، صعوبة الاندماج في سوق العمل. فبالتالي لو نرجع للسؤال من ناحية قانونية أيضا، رجال الأعمال أو من لا كان لديهم رأس مال كبير استطاعوا من الناحية القانونية أن يوفروا على خدمات قانونية، يكون معهم محامي، يكون معهم مستشار. هذا سهل لهم تسهيل الإجراءات البيروقراطية، تسهيل الأمور، اتخاذ هذه الإجراءات من دون أن يضطروا إلى الدخول في قضايا أو مشاكل أخرى، بعكس الفئة الأخرى اللي هي الأقل دخلا أو المستثمرين الصغار أو أصحاب المشاريع الصغيرة الذي ليس لديهم المال، إضافة إلى عدم الخبرة والوصول إلى المستوى القانوني أنه يدفعوا تكاليف محامي. هذا يعرضهم إلى الخطر ويحد من فرص نمو مشاريعهم وأعمالهم. وعلى الصعيد الاجتماعي أيضا يظهر لدينا تباين، إنه من يمتلك الشبكات والدعم والعلاقات استطاع أن يتوسع في مصر وخارج مصر، يشتغل على مستوى داخل وخارج البلد، بينما وكان في تسهيلات كثيرة، في عواقب كثيرة، منها الترخيص، منها الإنشاء، الدخول إلى سوق العمل المصرية بشكل أسرع. بينما من لم يكن لديه هذه العلاقات الاجتماعية وهي الفئة الأكثر، هذول ظلوا يعانوا من فجوة داخل المجتمع بين من تمكن بين الدخول الاقتصاد الرسمي المصري وبين من لم يستطع، وبين من بقي على هامش هذه الموارد المحدودة والأعمال الغير رسمية أيضا، لأن أغلبها غير رسمية لم يتم تسجيلها بسبب الإجراءات المالية المعقدة وأيضا الإجراءات الإدارية الطويلة يعني. فبالتالي إذا جينا إلى سؤالك حول دور رأس المال، دور رأس المال الاجتماعي يعد عامل حاسم جدا في مصر، لأنه المال أو الموارد المالية وحدها لا تكفي، إذ يعتمد الكثير من اليمنيين المستثمرين خصوصا على شبكات اجتماعية كبيرة لبناء ثقة لتجاوز عقبات اقتصادية واجتماعية وقانونية. هذه الشبكات لم تقتصر فقط على أبناء الجالية اليمنية أو الداخلية فقط، لا، كان لهم شبكات خارج اليمن يعني مع مصريين، مع غير مصريين، خليجيين، وكان في تبادل في هذه العلاقات. فهذه ساهمت إنه يفتحوا فرص جديدة، إنه ينشأوا بشكل أوسع، إنه يتوسعوا ويحصلوا على فرص ومميزات كونهم مستثمرين في داخل مصر. بينما من لا يمتلك هذه قوة رأس المال الاجتماعي لم يستطع الدخول، لم يستطع التوسع في أعماله، بقيت أعمالهم محصورة، بقيوا في حالة من إنه أنشطتهم غير مسجلة، الخوف من إنه قد يستمر، قد تغلق هذه الأعمال، تكاليف الإقامة الباهظة، عدم حصولهم على أي مميزات. هذا كله أدى إلى أنه يظلوا في حالة بعيدين، وبالتالي يؤدي إلى هذا الانقسام، يؤدي إلى تعميق الانقسام داخل الجالية اليمنية بين من استطاع الاستقرار والتوسع وبين من لم يظل أو ظل على هامش الاقتصاد. فبالتالي في كملخص لذلك أن مجتمع الأعمال اليمني هو منقسم تماما بين الاندماج الاقتصادي والسياسي، وبين من استطاع الحصول على فرص والاستفادة منها، وبين من اقتصرت على مشاريع تسعى فقط للبقاء. يعود ذلك إلى قوة رأس المال، إلى العلاقات الاجتماعية، إلى الشبكات تفتح أبواب، بينما يؤدي ضعفها إلى التهميش. لذا فإنه من المهم أن يكون في تعزيز شبكات إلى جانب الإصلاحات القانونية والاقتصادية لتحقيق انتشار أوسع في تنمية المشاريع. شكرا.
شكرا كتير قبول. Thank you so much قبول. So we will have now a summary of Qabul's presentation in English by the translator provided by Sadaj, and then we will move on to Thuraya.
Yes, I would be the translator.
So I would like to thank you for Maya, there's a problem with the mic. It's echoing.
Yes. Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. So Qabul was noting the mix of success stories that were divided between those that have managed to integrate and seize opportunities and those who remained on the margin, striving to make a living. Many have been compelled to rebuild their lives amid the conflict and the ongoing conflict in Yemen. And her study described how the Yemeni business community in Egypt was divided not on a political level, but also on an economic, legal, and social levels. There is a group of well-off businessmen who arrived with considerable capital and prior experience in trade, along with regional networks. which has enabled them actually to establish companies, engage in import and export activities, and benefit from the incentive and exemptions provided by the Egyptian investment system. In contrast, the majority of the Yemeni community have limited resources, who have turned to small and micro enterprises such as restaurants, cafes, shops, and basic services, along with produces from families. However, they face challenges due to limited access to finance and due to a difficulty in integrating into the formal market. And at the legal level, they struggle to afford due to cost of registration and bureaucratic procedures that are not able to meet and in consequence find themselves in the informal economy, making them even more vulnerable and making their opportunities of growth and expansion very limited. Socially, there is a clear disparity between those who possess strong support networks, extensive connections that help them to overcome obstacles, and those who remain isolated without any backing. This deepens actually the divide within the Yemeni business community itself between those who have successfully entered Egypt's formal economic system and those who remain on the margin. And with regards to social capital and how it has been a decisive factor determining the success of Yemeni entrepreneurship in Egypt, Kubul notes that financial resources alone were not sufficient, as many relied on the strength of their social networks to build trust and overcome legal and economic challenges. These relationships took place through family ties, acquaintances within the Yemeni communities, as well as partnerships with Egyptians that facilitate business registration, licensing, and market access. They also include connections with organizations or intermediary who help navigate bureaucracy and open new opportunities. So those who integrated into the formal economy, on the other hand, benefited from opportunities, and others didn't due to small projects struggling to survive and creating a divide between these two communities. And therefore, Kubul suggests empowering these communities by strengthening their networks, alongside legal and economic reforms to achieve greater integration and more active contribution to the Egyptian economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kubul, and thank you, Maya, for translating. So far we've been discussing diaspora entrepreneurs from Syria, Sudan, and Yemen who rely heavily on social capital to navigate Egypt's business environment. The research on Libyan businesses presents a completely different picture. Instead of individual entrepreneurs building social networks, we have a transnational business community that is dominated by public sector investments and political connections. So I want to turn now to Thuraya, who wrote the essay on the Libyan business community in Egypt. Thuraya, can you explain what this transnational model looks like in practice and why Libya's underdeveloped private sector struggles to establish itself independently in Egypt?
Yes. First, thank you again, Noor and Yazid and Carnegie, for allowing me to contribute to this issue. I'm also proud to be able to discuss the transnational Libyan community question through the lens of the business environment in Egypt. And I would also like to point out that my article focuses on the study of a certain business community, mainly comprising businessmen at the head of large companies. So this study is a part of my broader research on transnational Libyan elites. I have therefore not focused on the specific case of small Libyan entrepreneurs in Egypt, which I have not directly studied, but I think my analysis indirectly points out the issues that small Libyan business owners may face in Egypt. So I highlight how large Libyan entrepreneurs, thanks to their transnational characteristics, have managed over time to survive and grow their businesses from Egypt, despite the major obstacles posed by Egyptian markets. So this is what has enabled it to maintain itself over time and navigate through the various political and geopolitical challenges of the past and present. So to answer to your question, firstly, it's important to understand that this business community has become transnational due to the economic context that has prevailed in Libya for several decades. Before the liberalization process, the liberalization process was initiated in Libya in the 90s, a state economic model prevailed, characterized by the predominance of the public sector over the majority of the country's business sectors, with a strong concentration on the hydrocarbon industry. And unlike in most developing countries, economies, where the private sector generally accounts for more than half of national economic activity, in Libya, its weight has never exceeded 5%. So due to the regimes banning private-owned property from 1978 until a gradual opening up in the early 90s, private sector entrepreneurs were forced to develop mainly within the informal economy or leave the country to pursue their activities elsewhere in the Middle East and North Africa or in Europe. So these actors have effectively developed international cultural capital by studying, working, and living abroad, particularly in Egypt. And they have developed a political, financial, and social network within Egyptian and international environments. At that time, the lack of economic opportunities in Libya, combined with the economic liberalization already underway in Egypt since the 70s and accentuated by structural adjustment reforms in the 90s, provided a favorable environment for these Libyan entrepreneurs to develop their activities. So first from abroad and then between Libya and Egypt. So their long-term presence in the Egyptian market has enabled them to expand their operations and found run large companies and even multinational conglomerates. Today, their activities extended to diversified and strategic sectors such as hydrocarbons, real estate, construction, services, tourism, and so on. And these well-connected business people have sustained their businesses partly by diversifying their operating methods. They invest capital by acquiring shares or stakes in projects, while they continue to develop their own companies or subsidiaries that produce goods and services. And on the other hand, on the 90s, Libyan business abroad started to come back in Libya and developed a real transnational activities between Libya and abroad. Additionally, major Libyan businesses operating in Egypt tend to establish their main activities in a broader transnational context, operating across Egypt, Libya, and the United Arab Emirates. Libyan business people and private economic actors seems to find the UAE a more attractive destination for investment than in Egypt. The UAE business environment has a streamlined bureaucracy and substantial tax advantages, offering a more favorable operational framework. So in addition, the Emirates do not have the same economic challenges as Egypt, most notably its chronic shortage of foreign currency and rampant inflation. And moreover, actors of the transnational business community hold several citizenships and regularly travel between these three countries, where they temporarily really reside to conduct their business. So this transnational strategy allows this established business community to benefit from the stability and advantages offered by the UAE while maintaining a presence in Egypt. And more that, the transnational business community has also formed through ideological affinities with the Egyptian and Emiratis authorities, particularly for Libyan business players promoting a liberal political ideological vision and moderate Islam. Some Libyan players have invested in both the Egyptian and Libyan media sectors to promote this vision and counter the influence of political Islam in the region. So this point is also enabled them to renew themselves during and after 2011. And to answer to your second question, why Libya's underdeveloped private sector struggles to establish itself independently in Egypt. So as I explained on the article, from the 90s, from the liberalization period, Libyan regime mobilized these business people as intermediaries, particularly to facilitate the transfer of funds abroad. So collusion between the private sector and the state guaranteed economic advantages for political and business elites, while enabling the ruling elites to consolidate what we call the political economy of obedience. So by allowing the privatization of certain sectors and offering investment opportunities, the regime strengthened in its support base among elite economic players who became dependent on the government to maintain their privileges in the country. In parallel, and despite a policy of liberalization, public sector dominance in Libya's domestic economy continues to be reflected in Libyan investment abroad, which are made primarily through the country's sovereign wealth fund, the Libyan Investment Authority, which was designed to capitalize on the surplus revenues from hydrocarbon exports. So the Libyan Foreign Investment Company carries out most Libyan investment abroad activities in Egypt in the form of shareholdings or investments. And however, while the public sector appears to be maintaining its dominance, it is very difficult to identify who's who, because Libya state's investment strategies are implemented through a multitude of institutional structures that jointly finance various subsidiaries with opaque ownership and complex financial setups. For example, some Libyan institutions hold shares in Egyptian entities. And on the other hand, the nature of Libyan state investment in the Egyptian market has also been complicated by the misappropriation of public funds used for this purpose in Libya. For example, before 2011, individuals close to the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi reportedly used state funds to invest in Egypt's real estate, hospitality, and other sectors, establishing complex financial schemes for their private enrichment. So even today, access to public funds and contracts depends on a network of privileged political influence. So it is well connected. Just to conclude, it is well connected and firmly established businessmen who can maintain their economic activities in Libya and secure advantage abroad. And the transnational Libyan business community has been established for a long time and therefore has the necessary political and economic networks in both Libya and Egypt to maintain its economic activities. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Thuraya, for presenting us with like an overview of Libya's business presence in Egypt, which is dominated mainly by public sector investments and a very well-established transnational business community that has deep ties to Libyan state structures. So it's a very different picture from the case of Syrian, Sudanese, and Yemeni businesses. So it's time to wrap up. I want to thank again everyone who joined us today. Special thanks to our 5 amazing speakers, Marie, Maya, Thuraya, Dua, and Qubul, for joining us and presenting to us the essays you wrote. I also want to thank my colleague Yazid Sayer. We worked together on editing the essays and reviewing them. And so basically, it's very hard to summarize because we're talking about so many different case studies. But basically, I think there's a key message from the different presentations, which is that the Arab diaspora entrepreneurs, they navigate similar systemic challenges as their Egyptian counterparts in terms of their need to rely heavily on social capital, and they need to work through bureaucratic obstacles. But there's a difference in the sense that diaspora businesses face an additional layer of vulnerability and precarity given their dependency on residence permits and entry visas, which creates major uncertainties. We heard the term legal also ambiguity or vagueness in the whole system. But what's also interesting is that this legal uncertainty doesn't affect everyone in the diaspora community equally. We have larger diaspora businesses that can secure multi-entry investor visas, long-term residency permits, while smaller ones face severe obstacles. So basically, the diaspora business landscape mirrors the stratification of the Egyptian business community. It's like a pyramid with the well-connected businesses on top. They can access formal channels, achieve strategic growth. Then we have the small and medium-sized ventures that face very limited growth prospects, and the micro enterprises confined to the informal economy. That's just my humble attempt to just summarize a picture, but knowing that there are nuances in this big picture that I presented and in the different case studies. Thank you again for joining us, and please keep an eye out on our publications at Carnegie, and I'll see you again soon in a different webinar, hopefully for a new compendium we work on with Yazid. Thank you again.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.